Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the housing office.
Hi, here for your room key.
Actually, no. I got a bill in the mail today.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Some students got a second copy of their housing bills. You can just ignore it if you've already paid.
Yeah, no, actually it's my phone bill. I just got it, and it looks like there were all these calls made during the summer break, and I wasn't even here. I turned in my room key at the end of last term.
Right, but do you remember making arrangements to have your phone service turned off before you left?
Was I supposed to do that?
Yeah, you were.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's in the contract.
What contract?
Okay, you had service with the phone company, right?
Sure.
And you got a copy of the contract when you signed up?
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh, well, okay then. It's buried in the details of the contract, in the fine print. And I've got to admit that I might not have noticed it myself, but I've dealt with 2 or 3 other cases like this, and it does state that it's your responsibility to cancel the service.
Really?
I'm afraid so. You might not have seen it, but it's in there.
But I thought that the housing office automatically shuts the service off when the university closes for the summer break.
I'm afraid not. Classes may end for you, but the university doesn't close down. We have a whole summer program of short courses, so it's likely that someone who was enrolled in the summer program was assigned to your old room. And when they plugged the phone in...
The service was already there. Oh, wow. I really made a stupid mistake.
Oh, well, don't be too hard on yourself. And there is a chance we could do something. What was your old room number?
Baker Hall, room 622.
Okay, it looks like someone did stay there over the break. What I can do is contact them and ask them to give us a call. Then we'll explain what happened and we'll give them your contact information.
Okay, but what if you don't get a reply?
Well, I hope that doesn't happen, because if it does, then you're on your own. Again, what it comes down to is this. You signed a contract with the phone company, and there's really not much we can do to help you at this point.
Why does the student go to the housing office? What mistake did the student make? What does the man imply about the student with regard to her contract for telephone service? What does the man imply about the telephone bill? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I got a bill in the mail today.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Some students got a second copy of their housing bills. You can just ignore it if you've already paid.
Yeah, no, actually it's my phone bill.
Why does the student say this?
Yeah, no, actually, it's my phone bill.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Until about 30 years ago, scientific opinion was pretty much unanimous in thinking that dinosaurs were cold-blooded creatures and not warm-blooded like mammals and birds. What do these terms cold and warm-blooded mean? Well, they're imprecise terms, a little bit inaccurate, but for the sake of consistency, I'll continue to use them. Warm-blooded animals, or technically endothermic animals, are animals that use their own metabolism to maintain a relatively high, generally constant body temperature. They generate their own heat, whereas cold-blooded animals, technically called ectothermic animals, cold-blooded animals rely on the environment primarily to regulate their body temperature. And their body temperature can actually vary a great deal depending on the temperature surrounding them. Now, as I said, mammals and birds are warm-blooded creatures. And we, being mammals, you're familiar with, your body stays pretty much the same temperature all the time. Whereas if you've ever seen, say, snakes or lizards, basking in the sun on a rock, you can see the characteristic feature of a cold-blooded creature that is using the environment to help regulate its body temperature. As I said, until about 30 years ago, dinosaurs were, because they seemed to most closely resemble reptiles, they were thought to be cold-blooded. Then, about 30 years ago, a number of scientists began to suggest the possibility that dinosaurs might, in fact, be warm-blooded. This was very exciting for a variety of reasons. Warm-blooded creatures are closer to us. They're more active. They move faster. They can live in a wider range of environments than cold-blooded creatures. So a lot of scientists kind of got on this bandwagon for warm-blooded dinosaurs. But unfortunately, a lot of the evidence for dinosaurs possibly being warm-blooded is indirect. Among the pieces of evidence is that the fossilized remains of dinosaurs have shown that certain kinds of dinosaurs had feathers. Now, feathers in birds, one of their main functions, apart from helping certain birds to fly, is that they're an insulator. They preserve body heat. So, by analogy, some people have argued, well, okay, if there were feathered dinosaurs, maybe they had feathers for insulation. Yes, maybe. But maybe not. Another piece of indirect evidence is that some dinosaur remains have been found in areas, latitudes, that today have Arctic climates, and might in fact have had very cold climates at the time that the dinosaurs were living there. It's hard to function as a cold-blooded creature in an Arctic climate. Unfortunately, we don't have exact climate information. It's only been suggested that these areas might have been as cold as they are today. So again, this is not, a knockdown argument in favor of dinosaurs being warm-blooded. Another argument for the warm-blooded theory has to do with looking at the anatomy of dinosaurs and at the similarities with warm-blooded animals. If you look at what's around today, well, let's see. Today, anything that walks on two legs is warm-blooded. That goes for humans and some other primates and birds, like the ostrich. Okay? Only warm-blooded creatures, like ostriches, have upright posture. All right, so proponents of the idea that dinosaurs were warm-blooded say, well, look at dinosaurs. Some of them had upright posture too. Coincidence? They say no, these two-legged dinosaurs were warm-blooded too. Okay, but on the other hand, as far as we can tell, dinosaurs lacked a body structure called the respiratory turbinate. Why is that significant? Respiratory turbinates are these complicated structures inside the nasal cavity. They're lined with soft tissue, and their function is that as the air passes through these complicated kind of curlicue passages, air coming in is warmed up so that a warm-blooded creature isn't shocked by, its lungs aren't shocked by receiving cold air directly from the outside, which would really disturb its internal temperature. So unless there's some other mechanism that we don't know about, it seems that the dinosaurs lacked this vital feature of all existing warm-blooded animals.
What is the main purpose of the lecture? There is evidence that some dinosaurs had feathers. According to the professor, why does this support the theory that dinosaurs were warm-blooded? What does the professor imply about regions that now have Arctic climates? Why does the professor mention ostriches? What is the professor's opinion of the theory that dinosaurs were warm-blooded? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
So unless there's some other mechanism that we don't know about, it seems that the dinosaurs lacked this vital feature of all existing warm-blooded animals.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
So unless there's some other mechanism that we don't know about,
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
There's a common notion that psychology is about what's wrong with people. But psychology also offers us important tools for living happier, for getting more satisfaction out of life. And a key concept in the field of health psychology is resilience. When resilient people face adversity, they generally refuse to be discouraged. So when a negative event occurs, say losing a job or another major setback, are they like, why did this happen to me? Or do they try to bounce right back and perhaps learn something meaningful? This attitude, this tendency to deal with difficulties in a positive way is what we call resilience. Resilient people don't generally feel like victims or feel sorry for themselves or complain a lot when things go wrong. Instead, they use active coping mechanisms. Active coping includes things like finding social support and reframing stressful situations in a positive light. And research shows that using active coping mechanisms is associated with an improved sense of well-being. Take this scenario. The psychology department here recently started offering some courses online over the internet, but before students can enroll, they have to master some fairly complicated computer skills. Some students get frustrated easily and perceive this challenge to be insurmountable. They just sit around complaining. But students who are more resilient find a way to learn the technology. They even seem to like the challenge, even when it's more difficult than they expected and not much fun. Unlike the first group who just throw up their hands, what I'm talking about is persistence, coming back again and again after repeated failures. Persistence is another aspect of resiliency, and so is seeking to learn from adversity, realizing the value of what we take away from one challenge and using it to help us tackle the next challenge. Think of resilience as a set of personality traits that predispose someone to approach a difficult situation as a challenge that can be overcome, and that might even offer an opportunity for some deeper understanding.
So, do you think resilient personality traits are inborn, or are they learned, acquired somehow?
Well, I don't want to go into biology, but there's some evidence that you're born with a certain predisposition, let's say. So you have a genetic factor there. However, if you're raised in a family where people have a lot of energy, where parents coach their children through adversity, that predisposition isn't going to affect you as much as the environment in which you are raised. Now, having said that, if you're raised in a home where it tends to be negative, that's going to affect how you see the world, but not irreparably. You can have other adults in your life other than your parents, what we call natural mentors, who can model and encourage resilient behavior. Yeah, maybe a grandparent or a neighbor or a coach who inspires you to practice harder after losing a game.
Say once you're an adult and you're out of school and living on your own, is it possible to teach yourself to become more resilient?
Well, historically, the predominant view was that personality was pretty much set by age 30. But recently, we found evidence suggesting that fundamental personality traits such as agreeableness and willingness to take risks can change to some degree. One major survey found that experiences like education, jobs, and parenting can alter personality, and generally for the good. For example, holding down a job requires that a person be conscientious and organized, so people tend to become more responsible as they age. So while it does get harder to change the older we get, it is possible. But to be more specific about your question, how can we become more resilient? Well, first we need to identify traits we have that make us less resilient. Which traits might fit into that category?
Impatience or fear of failure?
Sure. Also being overly critical of ourselves, demanding perfection. By becoming aware of such tendencies, it may be easier to block or ignore them when they get in our way. But we should also identify our traits that can help us become more resilient. Like perfectionists tend to be very good at setting goals, so they could set a new goal of becoming more resilient. It also helps to ask a supportive friend to encourage them, like those frustrated psychology students I mentioned earlier. A friend could help them identify what's blocking them, fear of breaking the computer maybe, and reassure them, and also stress the rewards of taking online courses, like getting a good education or finding a whole new career.
What is the main purpose of the lecture? Why does the professor mention online courses being offered by the psychology department? What point does the professor make about natural mentors? According to the professor, how do the demands of working at a regular job affect a person? According to the professor, what can people do to become more resilient? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
So when a negative event occurs, say losing a job or another major setback, are they like why did this happen to me? Or do they try to bounce right back?
Why does the professor say this?
Why did this happen to me?
Listen to a conversation between a student and his professor.
Professor Anderson, I really don't want this to come out sounding all wrong. Like, I really appreciate you seeing me, taking the time and everything.
What is it, Michael?
Well, it's about the modern drama course.
Oh, yeah, well, there's a lot of work in that class. I hear about it all the time from students, so let me guess. Is the reading too difficult? Assignments too long?
No, actually, it's just, I thought we'd be reading different stuff, like more modern.
What we're reading is very modern. Quintessentially modern. I mean, don't you think Samuel Beckett's works are modern?
Frankly, no. I mean, I think he's more modern than Chekhov, but he wrote his best stuff over 50 years ago.
Oh, I see. So, by modern, you mean...
Like David Mamet. I mean, he's alive and writing right now.
I think what you mean is you'd like to read more contemporary playwrights. Is that it?
Yeah. Contemporary, modern, basically the same thing, right?
Well, we do use them interchangeably in an everyday speech. But in terms of the history of drama, modern generally means the early and mid-20th century. The first 6 decades or so, but really it has less to do with this span of time and more to do with the work of a few very important playwrights.
I can see that these people may have been revolutionary artists for their times, but are their ideas, still relevant today? I mean, aren't they, old hat?
Well, I think that if you take a closer look at contemporary playwrights like David Mamet, you'd realize that what he's doing is not all that different from what, say, an earlier playwright like Beckett, or even Chekhov, for example, was doing. And it's almost impossible to imagine that David Mamet could be writing the way he does if it hadn't been for those earlier playwrights.
Can you give me an example?
Mamet's use of language and the rhythm of the dialogue. Like Beckett, rhythm was an important element in his dialogue. There's one particular play written by Mamet called The Cryptogram, which is a great example of this. Let's just say that Beckett looms behind all of Mamet's plays, but this one, The Cryptogram, well, it's not only Mamet's language that recalls Beckett, but also the predicament in which Mamet's characters find themselves. Really, Michael, I don't think the course description is misleading. This is a course on modern drama, and that is what we're reading. I mean, if you're interested in contemporary dramatists, then you can, if you want, write your first paper on a contemporary playwright, but only if it's a comparison with the work of an earlier playwright. I think that would be a good exercise, and it might even help you resolve some of the problems we talked about today.
Why does the student go to see the professor? What is a view expressed by the student about early and mid-20th century playwrights? Why does the professor mention Mamet's play, The Cryptogram? What is the professor's suggestion for the student's first paper? Why does the professor say this?
This is a course on modern drama, and that is what we're reading.
Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
Perspective. This was a brand new idea in art during the European Renaissance. Before this time, painters had accepted the fact that a painting was two-dimensional, and everything was more or less flat in a painting. But you can, as you're painting or drawing, make it look like it has depth. Make it look like things get farther away as they go back. During the Renaissance, new techniques were developed to do this. Now, the simplest example would be trying to draw a picture of a road. If you draw two parallel lines right next to one another, the road looks flat. It doesn't look like it stretches off into the distance. In order to make it look like it stretches off into the distance, you draw your two lines slightly converging, getting closer and closer together until they meet at what we call the vanishing point. This gives you the illusion that the road gets farther and farther away from you, the viewer. So, as this process of perspective in painting became more and more common and more popular, it began to be used by set designers. Set designers in the theater at this time were generally painters. So, these painters who were creating perspective paintings decided to do the same thing on stage and create perspective set designs. In order to do this, they had to use wings. What is a wing, you ask? Good question. Well, it doesn't involve birds or flying. In this context, a wing is a large wooden frame covered with a canvas. Basically, it's a very large painting, let's say 3 meters long by 2.5 meters tall. A typical set design during the Renaissance would have 4 wings on stage left, 4 wings on stage right, and another one in the back, creating the illusion of one big, giant painting. And you would arrange these on stage, and it would look like a town square or a grove of trees in the woods, or whatever the setting was. There were 2 ways to arrange these wings to create the illusion of perspective on stage. The earliest method was known as angled wings, because perspective was difficult to do at first, right? It was a new technique. Painters were just getting the hang of it. This involved placing your wings not directly facing the audience, but slightly angled toward the back of the stage. This is just like that drawing of the road, where the lines start to come together. By placing the wings at this angle, it made it much easier for the painters to create the illusion that things got farther away as you moved toward the back of the stage. Whether it was buildings, trees, or whatever type of set you were trying to create. There was a problem with angled wings, though. The illusion was beautiful, but angled wings are very difficult to change. Made it very hard to have more than just one setting for any given play. They came up with a method for shifting or changing these angled wings, but you'll see that it wasn't very convenient. It involved simply having multiple canvases for each wing. If you have your wing, and it has its scene painted on it, you could hang 2 or 3 more canvases over the back. When you wanted to change sets, you simply take that canvas and flip it over to the front. Of course, it requires a number of people to do that, and it never quite looks right, because it's not firmly attached to the frame. Another way was known as flat wings. So, as painters got better at painting in perspective, as their techniques became more advanced, they developed the ability to have these wings directly facing the audience, instead of angling them in. This development made it easier to change sets. They said, We'll just put another behind another behind another. When it's time to change a set, we simply pull the first ones away, and we reveal the ones that are behind. Of course, the problem with lining them up was that it still required a number of people to drag these large wings out of the way. Then, in 1645, the chariot and pole system was developed. The chariot was simply a rolling wagon located below the stage on tracks. Poles connected it to the wings through long holes in the stage floor. Using a system of pulleys and ropes that were all attached to a single crank, one person could sit below the stage and move all the wings off or on stage at once.
What is the lecture mainly about? Why does the professor mention a picture of a road? What limitation did angled wings help to overcome? What was an advantage of flat wings over angled wings? How did the invention of the chariot and pole system change theater productions? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
What is a wing, you ask? Good question. Well, it doesn't involve birds or flying.
Why does the professor say this?
What is a wing, you ask? Good question.